Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into some really concerning developments unfolding in the Middle East.
Hmm.
Specifically, we're focusing on this rapid escalation, the direct conflict between Iran and Israel, looking right around Saturday, June 14th, 2025.
Right.
We've gathered a whole stack of reports, discussions, even online perspectives, and our mission is really to try and cut through some of the noise here.
That's the plan. We want to pull out the core facts, at least as they're presented in this material. Try to understand the sequence of events reported, pinpoint the main
Can
tensions.
see where the stories clash.
Exactly, where the narratives conflict. And importantly, explore the potential wider implications that are starting to bubble up in the analysis we've seen. It's complex and moving incredibly fast based on these sources.
Absolutely. And the big shift, I mean, the real turning point based on what we've read, seems to be that Saturday, June 14th. This wasn't just the usual proxy skirmishes.
No, not at all. The sources are pretty clear that Iran launched a direct retaliation for earlier actions taken by Israel, a definite shift.
Okay, so let's set that stage first. What were those prior Israeli actions mentioned in the material?
Well, the reports state clearly that Israel had previously targeted specific locations inside Iran.
Okay.
This included sites apparently connected to Iran's nuclear program. And there were also mentions, quite serious ones, of Israel killing high-ranking Iranian military leaders and even nuclear scientists in those earlier operations.
And the justification Israel offered, according to the sources, what was their reasoning?
The stated goal, based on the analysis we reviewed, was essentially to dismantle Iran's capability to build dangerous ballistic missiles.
Right.
The claim coming from Israel, as reported, was that Iran was getting very close to being able to develop nuclear warheads
Which they see
as
that.
an immediate existential threat, something that could, potentially wipe Israel off the map. So they argued they had to act now to stop that from happening.
Got it. And the U.S. angle. What did the sources say about the U.S. position at that point?
The initial U.S. stance, as noted, was that they weren't directly involved in those specific Israeli attacks we're discussing,
Okay.
but some sources did connect it back, mentioning former President Trump's earlier social media statement,
Mm.
the one that apparently gave Iran a 60-day window to negotiate.
Right, which the sources indicate didn't happen. Iran didn't take up that offer.
Correct. That's what the material suggests.
So Israel acts, citing this existential threat. Then, June 14th, Iran retaliates directly. What did the sources tell us about that specific counterstrike?
Iran apparently called their operation True Promise 3,
True Promise 3, okay.
and they launched missile and drone attacks aimed squarely at Israel.
And there was a difference between what Iran said they were targeting and what reports indicated was actually hit.
Exactly. That's a key point in the sources.
Right.
Iran maintained they were aiming for specific military sites, air bases were mentioned, but the information we looked at suggests the attacks actually impacted major Israeli cities. Places like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem saw impacts.
And the sheer number of missiles and drones, that was also disputed.
Yes, quite significantly.
Mm.
Iran claimed they'd launched hundreds. The Israeli military, the IDF, their figure was much lower. They stated it was less than 100 projectiles.
Okay, let's focus on the impact inside Israel from Iran's response, just based on the material we have. What did those reports describe?
Well, descriptions of explosions being heard across major cities, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, like we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Israel's air defense systems, the Iron Dome, were reportedly working overtime, lighting up the sky, trying to intercept everything coming in.
We also saw something about air defenses not quite performing as expected.
Yes, that was interesting. Some reports mentioned issues with something called the Golden Dome air defense system. The suggestion in those sources was that it wasn't quite as effective as maybe anticipated.
And beyond the interceptions, what about actual damage on the ground?
The material definitely mentioned damage. Buildings, residential areas hit. Areas south of Tel Aviv were specifically highlighted as being heavily affected.
And casualties.
Initial reports talked about around 40 people injured,
Okay.
mostly minor things, apparently from shrapnel. But the reports did specify 2 severe cases and 8 moderate ones needing hospital treatment.
Any other significant notes from the Israeli side?
Yeah, the IDF also apparently put out denials about rumors that Israeli pilots had been captured during the attack. They were quick to shut that down, according to the sources.
Okay, now let's switch focus. What about impacts in Iran? The sources suggested things were happening there too, around the same time frame?
That's right. Reports surfaced of explosions inside Tehran as well. And Iranian state media confirmed their own air defense systems were active, responding to something.
Were there any specific damage reports coming out of Iran related to Israeli actions that might have preceded this?
Yes, some specifics emerged. A couple of news outlets, AFP and Mer News were mentioned, reported seeing fire and thick smoke at Mehrabad Airport in Tehran.
And Iran was making its own accusations about Israel's strikes on its territory.
Oh, absolutely. Iran's UN ambassador didn't mince words at the Security Council. The reports quote accusations of barbaric acts and crimes by Israel.
And the key accusation was?
A really significant claim was that Israel had deliberately targeted civilian infrastructure, residential areas, and this is crucial nuclear facilities.
Okay, that's huge. Which nuclear sites did Iran claim were hit?
The material we reviewed specifically named Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. These are well-known nuclear sites.
And Iran reported casualties from those alleged Israeli strikes.
Yes, they gave figures, 78 killed and over 320 injured, emphasizing that the vast majority were civilians. It's important, as you note, that these casualty figures from Iran, attributed to Israeli actions, seem quite different from anything implied in the Israeli reports mentioned. Big discrepancy there.
This leads us straight into what feels like the most alarming part of this whole escalation, based on the sources, the nuclear dimension.
Absolutely. It jumps off the page in the reports. The fact that nuclear facilities are reportedly involved, potentially on both sides of the exchange, is deeply, deeply worrying.
And this wasn't just speculation, there was confirmation.
Yes, direct confirmation cited from the IAEA Director General, Rafael Grossi, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog.
What did Grossi confirm according to the reports?
According to the material citing him, Iran formally told the IAEA that their nuclear facilities at Fordo and Isfahan had been attacked.
Oh, wow.
He also mentioned reports suggesting parts of the Natanz facility, another major site, had actually been destroyed.
Any mention of contamination, radiation leaks, or anything like that?
Yes, the material did include reports mentioning concerns about potential radiation or chemical contamination following those strikes, though it also noted that Iran reportedly claimed any such contamination was contained.
So you have this stark conflict, Israel saying, we had to hit their nuclear program in self-defense before they annihilate us.
Right.
And Iran saying, our program is peaceful, and Israel committed a crime by attacking these civilian-linked, sensitive nuclear sites.
That's the core narrative battleground, isn't it? Especially around the nuclear issue. It's incredibly high stakes, and the sources really emphasize this tension.
And the international reaction reflects that level of concern.
Very much so. The material described widespread alarm from global leaders. People like UN Secretary General Guterres, European Commission President von der Leyen, their statements were mentioned.
What was the general message?
Strong calls for de-escalation, urging maximum restraint from both sides. You know, the usual diplomatic language, but likely with genuine fear behind it this time.
And the U.S. role became more prominent during Iran's retaliation phase.
It did. Several reports, including one citing U.S. officials via CBS News, indicated the U.S. military actively helped Israel intercept some of those incoming Iranian missiles.
So direct U.S. military involvement in the defense.
That's what was reported. And beyond that, there were descriptions of significant U.S. military movements in the region, assets being repositioned, ramped up.
Like what specifically?
The sources mentioned destroyers, specifically named the USS Arleigh Burke, DDG-116, moving east. Reports of additional destroyers being sent, maybe up to 8 total. The U.S. 5th and 6th fleets involved. Multiple warships, aircraft carriers ordered to the area.
That sounds substantial.
One source even put a number on it, suggesting potentially up to 26 U.S. ships could be linked to the conflict zone. That's a major, major show of force or preparation, according to the analysis.
And they also took steps regarding personnel on the ground.
Yes, the sources noted the U.S. evacuated non-essential personnel from some areas, particularly Iraq. The reason given in one report: a lack of control over the situation as it was escalating there. A worrying sign.
Meanwhile, back in Israel, the defense minister made a strong statement too.
He did. He was quoted in a report saying that Iran attacking civilian areas had crossed a red line.
So if we step back and look at the picture painted by all these sources, the direct attacks, cities hit, nuclear sites involved, the international scramble, U.S. muscle flexing, what's the bigger dynamic shift here?
It feels like a definite transition. Some sources explicitly use the term full-scale war, becoming a possibility or even starting. The analysis pointed out that both sides were releasing videos showing destruction, which kind of blurred the lines, suggesting the traditional distinction between purely military and civilian targets was maybe eroding in the narrative war if not in reality.
And Iran, despite Israel's defenses, showed they could land punches.
Yes, the sources highlighted that. Hitting areas south of Tel Aviv with missiles and drones demonstrated apparently that Iran does have the capability to get through some defenses and cause damage directly inside Israel. That's a significant data point.
Now, thinking strategically, if hitting Israel directly remains tough because of defenses, maybe U.S. help where else might Iran strike, according to the analysis you saw?
That's a key concern raised in the material. The analysis suggested that if hitting Israel proves too costly or difficult, Iran might look for, let's say, softer targets. And the specific worry mentioned was U.S. bases.
U.S. bases in other Middle Eastern countries?
Exactly. Bases hosted by other nations in the region.
And why is that considered such a dangerous potential move?
Because, as the analysis laid out, it immediately pulls the U.S. military in much deeper. It wouldn't just be defensive assistance, it would likely trigger a massive coordinated response from all U.S. bases across the region.
Which drags the host countries into it.
Precisely. It forces those host countries off the sidelines and directly into the conflict. That expands the whole thing dramatically, geographically and politically. It's a major escalation pathway.
And this ties into the wider geopolitical fault lines the sources were mapping out?
Spot on. The material highlighted these alignments very clearly. You have the U.S. firmly backing Israel. Then you have other perspectives noted, like China's UN representative apparently framing Israel's earlier actions as violations of Iran's sovereignty. And, of course, Russia's known close ties with Iran were mentioned.
So it's not just Iran versus Israel anymore. It has the potential, according to this analysis, to become a proxy battleground for bigger powers.
That's certainly how some of the analysis framed it, a potential clash between major global players, which could easily intersect with and probably worsen other global tensions, think trade disputes, the ongoing situation in Ukraine, and so on.
And the economic fallout mentioned, that seemed quite direct.
Yes, very direct. The reports talked about disruptions to shipping ships being seized or captured in crucial areas like the Suez Canal, the Red Sea.
Which means?
The almost certain consequence highlighted was oil prices surging significantly. And the analysis suggested that would ripple outwards, causing pretty serious global economic turmoil.
So at the absolute core of this, boiling it all down from the sources, it feels like there's this fundamental, almost existential clash of stories.
That really is the heart of it. You have Israel's narrative, as reported. Iran is hell-bent on getting nukes to destroy us, an existential threat right now, justifying preemptive strikes.
And Iran's counter-narrative.
That their nuclear program is peaceful, and it's Israel that's acting aggressively, trying to destroy the Iranian state, posing an existential threat to them, including attacking nuclear sites.
And when both sides see the other as, well, the devil, essentially, as completely untrustworthy and aiming for their destruction.
Negotiation becomes incredibly difficult. The material strongly suggests the current atmosphere of intense tension and deep-seated distrust makes finding common ground, well, almost impossible right now.
There was even that mention of a statement from Israeli PM Netanyahu.
Yes, reportedly calling directly on the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow their government.
Which seems like a long shot.
Well, the analysis pointed out the complexity there. Even if some Iranians are unhappy with their leadership, it doesn't automatically mean they'd side with Israel, especially not under these circumstances. It's much more nuanced than that.
Which just highlights again how hard any kind of diplomatic off-ramp would be, given the emotions and suspicion described in these sources.
Absolutely. And remember, the sources also pointed out Iran's previous reluctance to negotiate under U.S. pressure, like with that Trump ultimatum mentioned earlier. They've shown resistance to that approach before.
And even if Iran's usual proxies, like Hamas or Hezbollah, are maybe weaker after recent conflicts, and this changes the game, doesn't it?
Fundamentally, this isn't primarily about proxies anymore, based on these reports. This is state-on-state, Iran and Israel facing off directly. That's a different level of conflict.
It's clear from everything we've looked at that people watching this unfold globally are worried, seriously worried.
You definitely picked that up from the material. Online discussions, commentary sections, reports mentioning public sentiment, there's deep concern about this spiraling further.
Affecting more than just the region, more than just oil prices, but potentially shaking up global stability itself.
That seems to be the overriding fear reflected in the sources. That this is incredibly volatile, it's changing fast, and the stakes just feel extraordinarily high for everyone.
So wrapping up this deep dive, based purely on the source material we've examined, we've traced this alarming shift from long-standing proxy tensions to direct, open conflict between Iran and Israel.
Right.
Key flashpoints include reported attacks impacting major cities and, critically, the reported involvement and targeting of highly sensitive nuclear facilities on both sides.
A hugely concerning development.
This is all unfolding amid intense international scrutiny, clear U.S. involvement both defensive and through major military posturing, and against a backdrop described in the analysis having serious potential for economic shockwaves and dangerous geopolitical realignments involving major world powers.
All distilled strictly from the reports, discussions, and analyses we were working with today.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a crucial question to think about. Given these stark narratives of existential threats from both directions, the reported strikes on these incredibly sensitive nuclear sites, and the clear entanglement of major global powers, what kind of specific event, maybe an unforeseen one, or perhaps a miscalculation building on what we've discussed from the sources, could be that final tipping point? The thing that pushes this volatile situation completely beyond anyone's control, triggering much wider, perhaps devastating global consequences. And on the flip side, what factors that were mentioned might actually prevent that, or perhaps inadvertently trigger that next critical step? Something to definitely keep watching.